This is the original Keystep, and it's one of my absolute favorite MIDI controllers of all times, especially when it comes to the small and portable kind. And I do think that I'm not alone. A lot of us who loves hardware synths and modular, we just love this little MIDI keyboard. So of course I was really excited when I got the news that RØDE were making a new version of the original Keystep, and it's here. This is the Keystep 37. I've had the Keystep 37 here for a few weeks now, and even though I'm in the middle of a studio move, that's why everything looks different. Even though I'm in the middle of that, I've had some time to try it out. So in this video, we're going to go over what the Keystep 37 is all about. And full disclosure, RØDE sent this over for me to make this video, but they haven't seen the video before I release it. They have no say over what I do in these videos anyway, but I am a big RØDE fan because I think they make great products. So keep that in mind, I guess. The Keystep 37 is, as the name suggests, a 37 key keyboard, and yeah, it's just plug and play. You can basically connect it to anything and then it will work. I don't know if the keys are technically identical to the ones on the Keystep, but they do feel very much the same. Which does mean that it sets itself apart from any other slim key keyboard because it has a nice feel to it, and it also is velocity sensitive and has aftertouch. I think what makes the keyboard nice to play is that there's actual travel to the keys. A little bit of resistance. It doesn't feel like you're pushing down on a flat piece of plastic. Rather, it feels a little bit more like a real key. The thing that makes the Keystep unique is that it sports both an arpeggiator and a sequencer. It's a 64-step polyphonic sequencer. You can set it to monophonic as well, and the polyphonic part can stack up to 8 notes, which sets it apart from many other small MIDI keyboards. They simply don't have that kind of functionality, and if there's often when there's like arpeggiator functions and stuff like that, it's very software dependent. This is all in the hardware, so you can take it, connect it to your synth rig, and you'll have a sequencer, a one-track sequencer, and you'll have the arpeggiator as well. So that's quite nice. And it also has real MIDI I/O, which does set it apart from many other MIDI keyboards as well, so you can easily hook it up to other gear. For example, synthesizer samplers. Connected to the Digitakt, for example, that's something I really like to do with the original Keystep. It's also URAC compatible, so it has gate, pitch, and mod output, so you can connect it to your URAC setup, which is cool and nice. And of course, there's the knobs here. It's the new big addition to the Keystep 37. This isn't on the original Keystep. There are these 4 knobs here. We'll get into them a little later in the video, but basically you can use them to change chord types and do strumming with chords, which also affects the sequencer and arpeggiator, and you can also hit it and use them to control external synths or software using MIDI CC. And before I forget, I just want to mention that the Keystep 37, just like the original Keystep, comes with only a USB cord for power. You can use DC power, but then you have to go and buy your own little adapter. So that's something you should consider. But yeah, it works off of wall power as well as USB power just fine, but you need to get the adapter yourself. It still doesn't come in the box. So speaking of new features, we of course have this screen here where you, for example, can see the BPM. So it's much easier to set the BPM than it previously was on the original Keystep. What's also new here is the LEDs. So over each key, you can see here, when I'm pressing a key, it lights up. Now this is of course also useful when we go into chord mode. So I'll hit shift here and hit the chord here. You see what notes are actually in the chord. And we can then use these knobs here to change, for example, the strumming of the chord. The type of the chord. and the number of notes in the chord. And this effect also applies to, for example, the arpeggiator here. And the whole chord section here also applies to the sequencer, which is really nice. You can have a sequence running and then affect it. Let me see if I can show you here. Maybe I should talk a little bit more about the chord mode. So we can change the type here. So basically the type of chord, for example, we can do octaves, we can do fifths, I think here. And then there's notes here, which is basically how many notes are we playing. And notes function together with this knob here, which is velocity to notes, which basically sets how the amount of velocity or how strong you're playing affects how many notes are played in each chord. I think that is about it. And then we have strum here, which is basically for strumming. So there's a lot of different settings here. You can tempo sync it, for example, here to 8s, for example, or 32 and stuff like that, which is very cool. So you can do some nice strumming effects. And for those of you who don't know anything about the Keystep, I mean, if you love synth music production, you probably should by now. But if you're totally new, that's fine. I'm just gonna do a very basic rundown. So first off, we can change here between sequence and arpeggiator. So they're mutually exclusive. So you can have a sequencer running or an arp, not both at the same time. And over here, we can select between 8 different sequences, or if we're in ARP mode, different types of ARPs. So for example, there's a new one called walking, which is really cool. We know it from, I think there's something similar in the Keystep Pro. Basically it goes a few notes in the ARP and then it decides whether to repeat that same note over and over again, I think. Let me try and show you here. And then there's also pattern, which I think is sort of a randomized pattern. Then we can set the tempo over here. We can tap tempo here. We can also add rests and tie notes together for the sequencer. Basically, you can record in 2 different ways. Either you just hit in sequencer mode, you hit record and you just play something. And the speed of the sequence and the arpeggiator is set here. So different time divisions. Which is also kind of cool because you can do it like this, hold shift. Basically changing the time division when I let go of shift here, which is actually quite an interesting little performance thing you can do. You also have a lot of secondary functions that you hit shift in order to change. For example, swing. You set different swing values here, quite musical ones. You can set sequencer to mono. You can also enable overdubbing. So when you want to record something into the sequence that you already have, but you don't want to remove any of the existing notes, then use overdub. You can also set different scales. So for example, chromatic major and so on. We also have pitch and mod here on these strips here. And setting MIDI channel is very simple. Hold shift. Here we can set different MIDI channels. Very easy. Now another new feature, which is super welcome, it makes it a lot easier to create sequences, on this device here is that you can very easily set the length of the sequence. This is something which was more tedious to do on the original Keystep, and just a very big reason to pick up the Keystep 37. So created this little sequence here, it's 20 steps, but what if we want to change that? Well, hold down record here, and when you press a key, the number here adds that number of steps. Let me show you. Press 1, it says 1. Press again, 2. So now the sequence is 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps. Press 8, and we have 12, up till 64, which is max. So, for example, we can just hit 8. So it's really easy to set the step length, and this was something which was much more annoying to deal with on the original Keystep, so it's a big improvement. Now, what about these knobs here and using them to send CC values? Well, if we hit here, you can see that it goes here from 0 to 127. I think you can set the range here inside of the MIDI control center as well. And if I want to change the actual CC value that is being sent with this knob here, I think what I do is hold shift and I press chord here. Okay, yeah, so it blinks. And now I can set a CC value here. So let's set it to 24, for example. So why is this useful? Well, basically we have these different banks here, the 4 banks of 4 CC values. So now suddenly the Keystep goes from being just a nice sequencer or arpeggiator to also being a useful controller. For example, if you compare it to their things called Micro Lab. The Micro Lab is really tiny, portable, super nice to put in a bag, have with you on the go, but it doesn't have any knobs to control hardware synths or software synths. So suddenly you have that on this new edition of the Keystep, which I like. I really like that. And just to end off the video, here's a very brief size comparison between the original Keystep and the Keystep 37. So as you can see, quite a bit larger, but you also have the addition of those 4 controllers, making the new Keystep 37 much better for a computer-based setup than the original Keystep. So I hope you're fine with a slightly different setting here. I'm in the middle of a studio move, if you haven't noticed or seen on my channel. Yeah, if you want to see my series where I detail my plans and take you along for the ride of moving everything and setting up my new music and YouTube studio, yeah, the links will be in the description. And I hope that you stick around for more videos about synthesizers and music production gear and music production in general, because there's a lot more to come. The whole studio move is taking up a lot more time than I initially thought. But yeah, it's fun. It's exhausting. It's exhilarating, but it's also exhausting. So thank you for watching this video. Have a great day. Talk to you later.